They say the desert keeps its secrets. Wind buries them, sun scorches them, and time itself forgets them, until some poor soul digs too deep. That night in the saloon, when the lamps burned low and the whiskey burned hot, an old man's voice carried through the smoke. He leaned on a cane carved from mesquite wood, his one good eye glinting like a dying star. Folks swore he'd outlived 3 generations, and maybe he had, for he spoke with the patience of stone. "Let me tell y'all," he rasped, "about the widow of Hensley Ranch. Some call her broken, some call her trash, but the desert remembers her truer than any man ever will." The room stilled. Cards were set down. Boots stopped tapping. Even the piano player left the keys hanging. Out here, stories weren't just entertainment. They were warnings, carried like gospels across the frontier. The land around Dry Creek was the kind that broke a man's spirit before it broke his bones. A vast ocean of sand and stone, shimmering under a pitiless sun. Canyons split the earth like jagged scars, their shadows stretching long and black at sundown. Buzzards wheeled overhead, patient priests waiting for their funerals. At the very edge of that town, past the main street's creaking saloon, past the shuttered general store and the half-collapsed church, stood a ranch house bleached gray by years of sun. Fences sagged, the well was half-choked with dust, and the only sound was the wind rattling loose boards. That was Clara Hensley's place. A woman alone. A woman the town called cursed. Her husband, Jed Hensley, had been gunned down a year past, ambushed on a supply run. The killers were never caught, though folks had their suspicions. But suspicion don't raise cattle, and gossip don't mend fences. Clara, left with nothing but dry land and broken dreams, became little more than a ghost. She traded odd chores in town for flour or beans, but most days she stayed put, staring out across the barren fields where the cattle once roamed. Sometimes she'd sit on the porch long after dark, clutching a ragged quilt, whispering into the night, "I'm just trash." It was what folks said about her behind her back, and sometimes to her face. That evening, the desert changed. A storm had blown in from the west, wild and sudden. Not rain, no. The heavens had forgotten rain, but wind that carried sand sharp as knives. Clara pulled her shawl tight, fighting her way to the barn to fasten the doors, when she saw movement on the horizon. At first she thought it a coyote. Then she thought it a drunk stumbling from town. But as it staggered closer, she saw a man, half dead, blood soaking his shirt, collapsing into the dust just short of her porch. Clara's heart thundered. She hesitated, fear and pity wrestling inside her. But something in his broken shape, a reminder of Jed on that last ride, pushed her forward. She dragged him inside, laid him on the kitchen table, and lit a lantern. He was young, maybe no more than 20. His lips cracked from thirst, his skin pale under the blood. As she pressed a cloth to his wound, his hand shot up, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "The cloth," he gasped. "The cloth, give it to him, to Hensley." Clara froze. Her husband's name, whispered by a stranger who looked half in the grave. Before she could ask, his eyes rolled back, and he slumped into unconsciousness. That night, Clara sat awake by the lantern's glow, staring at the stranger's satchel. It was battered leather, soaked dark with blood, but still tied shut. Her hand trembled as she untied the knot. Inside, wrapped in a strip of faded blue cloth, was something heavy. She pulled it free, and the lantern light caught on metal. A Union Army medal, tarnished but unmistakable. And with it, a folded scrap of parchment. She didn't open it. Not yet. Her breath caught in her chest. Jed had never spoken of the war, save in muttered fragments. He was a rancher, nothing more, or so she thought. The wind moaned against the walls like a chorus of the dead. Clara pressed the cloth to her chest, heart hammering, and whispered again, "I'm just trash." But for the first time, the words felt hollow, as if the desert itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to see the truth. Back in the saloon, the old storyteller sipped his whiskey, the firelight catching the deep cracks in his face. "Now, mind you," he said, lowering his voice. This was no ordinary cloth. And what lay hidden in it was more than a metal, more than a memory. It was a key to the canyon, where blood and dust would write a legend none could forget. The room shivered, though the stove burned hot. For the desert don't keep its secrets forever. And Clara Hensley's story was just beginning. The desert is quiet in the mornings, but not gentle. It wakes like a great beast, stretching with a chill wind before the sun climbs high enough to burn the earth. At Clara Hensley's ranch, the day began as it always did. Creaking timbers, the wheeze of a pump that brought up more sand than water, and the hollow rattle of fence wire flapping in the wind. But this morning, the silence was broken by the groan of a wounded man in her spare room. The stranger stirred fitfully, sweat shining on his brow. Clara set a tin cup of water at his lips, tilting it slow. He drank like a man who'd crawled across the desert, then fell back against the pillow with a hiss. "You spoke my husband's name," Clara said at last, her voice brittle as dried sage. The boy's eyes flicked open, blue, fever-bright, ringed with exhaustion. "Hensley? Jed Hensley. He was supposed to take it, the cloth. But I was followed. They wanted it." Clara's hand tightened around the satchel, now resting under her chair. "Jed's been dead a year." The boy's chest rose shallow. "Then it's yours." All through the morning, Clara wrestled with the weight of that cloth. The metal gleamed dully in the lantern light, heavy with unspoken history. She had unwrapped the parchment at dawn, her fingers trembling as though the paper itself might bite. It wasn't a letter. It was a map, drawn in ink that had faded to rust red. The lines traced canyons and ravines north of Dry Creek, marked with a symbol, an X carved bold near a hollow gorge locals called Dead Man's Hollow. She stared at it until her vision blurred. What business could Jed have had with such a map? He had been a simple rancher, or so he always claimed. But the metal told another story, and now the whispers of his past clawed at Clara's thoughts. The town didn't help matters. That afternoon, Clara rode into Dry Creek with the excuse of buying flour. Dust lay thick on the street, stirred by the hooves of tired horses. A couple of wagons rattled past. The saloon's porch sagged under the weight of loafers who spat tobacco and eyed her with thin smiles. "Widow Hensley," one called, tipping his hat with mock gallantry. "Ain't often you grace us with your presence. Thought you'd shriveled up out there." Laughter followed. Clara kept her head down, shawl drawn tight. At the mercantile, Mrs. Calhoun measured flour without a word, though her eyes lingered on Clara's worn boots and the dirt ground into her palms. The silence pressed heavier than insult. Folks didn't need to speak to remind her of what she'd lost. On her way out, Clara caught wind of talk. Two ranch hands at the water trough spoke in low voices. "Hit something out by Dead Man's Hollow, I swear it. Hensley knew about it. Hensley's dead, fool. Then why is his widow riding into town all a sudden?" The words slithered under Clara's skin. She mounted her mare and left without looking back, but her mind burned with suspicion. That evening, as the sun bled crimson across the horizon, Clara sat on her porch, the metal cold in her palm. The boy inside muttered in fevered dreams, his voice breaking on names she didn't know. Clara's gaze drifted over the empty pastures, the graves of cattle long since taken by drought or thieves. Her eyes fell on a weathered trunk tucked in the corner of the barn, Jed's old things she'd never opened since his death. With shaking hands, she pried it open. Inside lay a cavalry jacket, faded Union blue, moth-eaten but intact. A pistol wrapped in oiled cloth. And beneath it all, a photograph, Jed younger, sterner, standing with a regiment of men. Her breath caught. He had hidden it all from her. The man she'd married, the man she'd buried, was more than a rancher. Clara lit a single candle that night and sat by the table with the map. The desert wind howled through the cracks in the walls, but inside the house the silence felt heavier than stone. She traced the canyon lines with her finger. Dead Man's Hollow. That was where the answer lay, what Jed had carried, what he had hidden, what had gotten him killed. Her heart ached with a strange mixture of betrayal and longing. She had spent a year believing herself abandoned to fate, nothing but trash to the townfolk. But now she saw a thread pulling her into something larger, something dangerous. And she feared it. By dawn, the boy's fever had broken. He woke with a hoarse cough, eyes clearer than before. Clara offered him broth, which he drank greedily. "You don't know what you've got, do you?" he rasped. Clara's jaw tightened. A medal, a map, and trouble. He gave a bitter laugh. That medal belonged to a man they called the Ghost of Shiloh. He brought justice with a rifle when lawmen failed. Some said he died, others that he vanished west. "If Jed Hensley was your husband," he trailed off, his eyes searching hers. Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her. Jed the ghost? It couldn't be. Yet the jacket, the pistol, the medal, they painted a truth she could no longer deny. The boy leaned close, voice urgent. "Outlaws want that map. There's a cache in the hollow, documents, weapons, proof of betrayal in this town. They'll kill you for it." That night, Clara sat alone again, staring at the metal gleaming in the candlelight. Her hands trembled as she whispered the words she had spoken 100 times since Jed's death. "I'm just trash." But something deep inside pushed back. Trash doesn't draw outlaws. Trash doesn't carry secrets men kill for. Trash doesn't hold the key to justice. The desert seemed to breathe with her, waiting. And for the first time, Clara wondered if she was more than what the town had made her. Back in the saloon, the old storyteller paused to wet his lips, his voice carrying through the smoky haze. "They laughed at her, he said. Called her nothing but a widow livin' off scraps. But when the desert calls a name, you listen or you pay the price." That metal, that cloth, that cursed map, they was a spark, and Clara Hensley was dry kindlin', ready to burn. He leaned forward, his single eye gleaming. And burn, she surely did. The desert don't grant second chances. When it calls your name, you either rise or you wither, and the bones of the withered get picked clean by buzzards. That's what the old storyteller said, and Clara Hensley knew it to be true the morning she saddled her mare, with the map tucked beneath her shawl. The boy was too weak to follow, though he begged. "They'll kill you," he warned, voice raw. "They'll kill me if I stay," Clara answered. "Least this way, I'll know why." Her rifle lay across the saddle horn, oiled and loaded, heavier than she remembered. Jed had taught her to shoot on summer evenings, their laughter ringing across the fields. She had thought it a game back then, something for passing time. But his voice echoed in her memory now, steady and stern. "Don't aim for the man. Aim for what he's fixin' to do. Stop his hand, his leg, his will. That's how you live." The ride to Dead Man's Hollow cut through a world carved by fire and wind. Sandstone cliffs rose in jagged spires, their faces streaked with iron red and ghost white. Dry riverbeds split the ground, their bottoms littered with bones of cattle and men alike. Heat shimmered so fierce the horizon rippled like water. But the canyon itself was cooler, shadowed by walls that loomed like the ribs of some ancient beast. Clara rode slow, ears sharp to every echo. A hawk wheeled overhead, its cry a knife in the silence. The map led her deeper, past rock formations shaped like watchmen, until the path narrowed into a gash of stone. At its end, hidden beneath a shelf of rock, she found it, a hollow sealed with boards blackened by age. Her breath caught. Jed had been here. She dismounted, pried loose the boards, and pulled free a rusted chest. Inside lay bundles of papers, wrapped in oilskin, and beneath them, weapons, 2 rifles, a revolver, and cartridges enough to fight a war. Clara's hands trembled as she unrolled the papers. Names. Dates. Accounts of shipments ambushed, bribes exchanged, lawmen paid off. And there, in bold strokes, the sheriff's name. Her stomach turned. Jed had died for this. The first shot cracked the canyon silence. Clara dove behind the chest as stone splintered inches from her face. Boots scuffed on gravel. Shadows moved at the canyon's mouth. 3, no, for men. Outlaws, rifles leveled, grins cruel beneath their hats. Well, one drawled. The widow herself. Didn't figure you'd get this far." Clara's heart pounded. She hadn't expected them so soon. Another voice, cold and sharp. "Hand it over, missy. That cloth, them papers. Or we'll put you in the ground with your husband." Her fingers tightened around her rifle. She could hear Jed in her memory, steady as always. "Don't wait to be shot at. Strike first, strike true." She rose from cover, rifle braced, and fired. The lead outlaw screamed, clutching his shoulder as he fell back. The others scattered, gunfire roaring like thunder between the canyon walls. Clara ducked low, breath ragged, as chips of stone rained down. She fired again, the kick slamming her shoulder, dropping another man to his knees. But there were too many. Boot steps scraped closer. A revolver cracked, the bullet whining past her ear. Clara pressed herself against the chest, whispering, "I'm just trash, just trash." Yet her hands were steady. She swung out, sighted quick, and squeezed the trigger. Another outlaw spun and dropped. The last two hesitated now, wary. "You ain't no widow," one spat. "No," Clara said through gritted teeth. "I'm his wife." They lunged together, rushing her flank. Clara ducked behind the chest, pulling Jed's revolver from the cache. It felt strange and familiar all at once, the grip molded by another's hand, yet fitting hers like fate. The first outlaw rounded the chest. Clara fired point blank. He collapsed, his gun clattering across the stone. The other seized her arm, twisting, the revolver discharging wild into the sky. They struggled, boots grinding into sand, his breath sour with whiskey. He snarled, "Shoulda stayed in your kitchen, woman." Clara slammed her forehead into his nose. He reeled back, cursing, blood streaming. She leveled the revolver and pulled the trigger. Silence crashed down. Only the echoes of the shots remained, fading into the cliffs. Clara sank to her knees, chest heaving. Her hands shook now, the violence of what she'd done settling into her bones. Yet beneath the fear was something else, a fire she hadn't known still burned in her. She gathered the papers and weapons, packing them into the chest. But as she straightened, a shadow fell across her. The sheriff. He stood at the canyon mouth, hat low, rifle cradled casual, as if he'd been waiting all along. His deputies flanked him, their badges catching the sun. "Well, look here," the sheriff drawled. "The widow's got herself a backbone. Didn't reckon you'd find the hollow." Clara's pulse hammered. The chest lay at her feet, its secrets plain to him. "You killed Jed," she said, voice low, steady. The sheriff's grin was thin as a knife. Jed Hensley weren't who he said he was. Ghost of Shiloh, some called him. He aimed to drag my whole town through the mud. Couldn't have that. Order had to be kept. His words hung like poison in the air. Clara's grip tightened on the revolver at her side. "Order," she spat. "You mean silence. You mean murder." The sheriff's eyes hardened. "Hand it over, widow. Don't make me shoot you down like I did your husband." The old storyteller's voice would one day carry this moment across 100 firesides, a widow, cornered, dust swirling around her boots, facing down the law itself with nothing but a dead man's gun and the truth in her hands. But in that moment, Clara only knew the feel of Jed's revolver, the weight of the metal against her heart, and the desert wind whispering in her ear. She raised the gun. The sheriff narrowed his eyes. Deputies reached for their holsters, and the canyon held its breath. Back in the saloon, the old man's voice rasped low, making every glass tremble on the bar. Blood and dust, that canyon saw it both. A woman alone, fastened down, wolves dressed as law. Folks say she should have been dead a dozen times over. But the desert had other plans. He leaned back, smoke curling around his head like a halo. And that's how legends are born. The desert has a way of making moments eternal. One breath stretches into forever. One heartbeat echoes like thunder, and a single choice can carve itself into legend. That was how it felt in Dead Man's Hollow, when Clara Hensley faced the sheriff and his deputies, the chest of secrets at her feet and her husband's revolver heavy in her hand. The sheriff's smile was thin, his eyes colder than the steel of his rifle. "Drop it, widow. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of your depth. That cloth, them papers, they'll burn tonight. Same as you if you don't hand 'em over." Clara said nothing. Her breath was steady, though her heart hammered like a drum. The canyon walls seemed to lean closer, listening. "You ain't a fighter," the sheriff pressed. "You're just trash-hanging onto a dead man's shadow." Clara's lips trembled. She whispered, "I'm just trash." Then her voice hardened like iron. "But trash burns." The deputies went for their holsters. Clara moved first. Jed's revolver barked fire, the shot echoing like cannon blast. One deputy spun and collapsed, his pistol clattering. Gunfire erupted, the canyon flashing with muzzle fire. Clara dove behind the chest, bullets sparking stone around her. Dust filled her lungs, acrid and choking, but her hands were steady. She rolled, sighted, fired. Another deputy fell. The last scrambled for cover, his shots wild, fear breaking his aim. The sheriff strode forward, calm as Sunday service, rifle raised. His voice boomed over the chaos. "You can't win, Clara. Your man couldn't, and neither will you." Clara ducked as his bullets split the air above her. She pressed her back against the chest, lungs burning, mind racing. Jed's voice came to her then, low and certain. "Don't fight the man, fight his mistake." She drew a deep breath, then kicked the chest hard, sending it skidding into the open. The sheriff's eyes flicked to it, just long enough. Clara rose, revolver steady, and fired. The bullet struck his rifle, jerking it wide. His shot went high, slamming into the cliffs. Clara advanced, step by step, eyes blazing. The sheriff staggered, clutching his ruined rifle, then drew his revolver with a snarl. The canyon thundered with their duel. The sheriff was fast, faster than most, but Clara was steady. Each shot rang like a hammer striking an anvil, sparks of destiny flying with the lead. Bullets screamed off stone, dust plumes rising where they struck. Finally, one found its mark. The sheriff cried out, dropping to a knee, blood spreading dark across his chest. His revolver slipped from his grasp, clattering into the dust. He looked up at her, hatred flickering like a dying flame. You're nothing. Just a widow, just trash." Clara leveled her gun, her shadow long in the canyon's fading light. "No," she said, her voice low, unshakable. "I'm his wife, and I'm the one who'll finish what he started." She fired. The sheriff fell, the dust rising to swallow him. Silence returned, broken only by Clara's ragged breathing. Smoke curled from the barrel of Jed's revolver. Her hands trembled, but her spirit did not. She stood over the bodies, over the chest, over the lies that had poisoned her husband's name. The metal at her breast gleamed faintly, catching the last red fire of the sunset. Clara buried the outlaws where they fell, though the sheriff she left for the buzzards. Some men didn't deserve the kindness of earth. Then she gathered the papers, the weapons, the proof of corruption, and loaded them onto her mare. When she rode back toward Dry Creek, the desert night was rising, a vast ocean of stars above, the land painted silver by moonlight. She rode not as a widow, but as a flame carried by the wind. News spread fast. By dawn, Clara Hensley walked into the sheriff's office with the chest in her arms. The townsfolk gathered, murmuring, eyes wide as she laid the evidence on the desk for all to see. Bribes, ambush records, blood-stained ledgers, all of it laid bare. Whispers turned to gasps, gasps to shouts. The sheriff's deputies, the ranch barons, the men who had sneered at Clara, exposed for what they were. And the widow they had called trash? She stood tall, revolver at her hip, a storm still smoldering in her eyes. Back in the saloon, the old storyteller let the crowd hang on the silence before finishing. His voice dropped to a gravelly whisper, and even the piano player leaned close to hear. They say Clara Hensley rode out of Dry Creek, not long after, took her husband's name, his medal, his cause, and carried it across the frontier. Wherever law failed, she brought justice. Wherever men laughed, she silenced, and with fire and lead. Some called her a ghost. Others called her an angel of vengeance. But to the desert, she was something more. She was proof. Proof that even the broken, the cast aside, the ones called trash, he tapped the bar with his cane, can burn hot enough to light a legend. He leaned back, the story finished, the smoke of memory curling through the lamplight. And that, folks, is why the wind still carries her name. Clara Hensley, widow no more, the firebrand of the hollow. The saloon was silent. Glasses sat untouched, cards lay forgotten. Somewhere outside, the desert wind moaned low, as if in agreement. And if you listened close enough, beneath that wind, you could almost hear a whisper, "I'm just trash," followed by the crack of a revolver and the echo of a legend born in blood and dust.